Bloodied woman barges in. Prowler at the window was not only my first post here, but it is also the very first time I've ever submitted anything I've written to the general public. I never thought of myself as being adept at writing, but I've always enjoyed it. Thanks so much for the supporting comments and requests for more. I had no idea that anyone would like it. Strange as it was an honest experience. The bottom was a great source of experiences. To be honest, it was probably a lot more sinister than I realized because I was young and naive. Having grown older, it isn't a place where I want to raise a family in today's world. Back then was a more innocent time. My memories of the bottom are both sweet and sour, but it was familiar. It was home. Still, I got to see some pretty terrific and occasionally terrifying things when we lived there. I could tell any of several stories to you. There was a teenager who started lighting fires all over the place one summer, who got caught at the wrong house and nearly got beat to death. There was that one long-haired dude who would break into houses and steal food and panties. He was never caught. There was the kid whose family lived 4 houses down the road from me that shot his neighbor in the back of the head with a gun. There was a swamp monster thing that killed a bunch of dogs in kitchens. There was the snake caught on a trout line that was confiscated by authorities. There was a kid who rode the school bus with me who saw a UFO and was the subject of a television documentary. There were the guys who went noodling and pulled a body out of a hole instead of a fish. We discovered an old, long-forgotten slave cemetery after finding some holes dug in the ground and scattered bones. It was a different kind of community, to say the least. I'm happy to share these stories if anyone wants me to do so. This particular incident happened just after school had let out for the summer vacations. It would have been early to mid-June of 77 or 78. I would have been 9 or 10 years old at this time. Of course, it was raining. It was a steady but moderate downpour. My grandfather would have called it a toad floater. It got dark early because of the storm clouds. A dusky, wet twilight at around 5 p.m. in the afternoon. It was an even gloomier day because I was stuck inside the house. In those days before cable television, we only got 3 channels on the television, and at 5 p.m., the news was on all 3 channels. My mother was just beginning to start cooking supper. She placed a pot of red beans on the stove to cook after soaking them all day, and she was in the process of cutting up tomatoes to fry when we heard the truck. Our property was bordered by the south side of FM 2797 that stopped in a dead end about a quarter mile past our house. At the southwest corner of our land was the entrance to Plaza Drive. This is the road that went down to the bottoms. At the northwest corner of our property, the road made a 90-degree turn and followed along our property line to the bottom. This 90-degree corner was the source of many hours of excitement. About once every 3 months, someone either entering or leaving the bottom would try to take that corner too fast and would end up either stuck in the field, or if I was lucky, they would actually get sideways in the turn and would roll their car if they were going fast enough. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want to see people get hurt, but it was always great fun to watch the tow truck come out and roll the car back onto its wheels and then haul it off. The tow truck driver would normally pick up any of the larger objects that fell out of the car, but they were never diligent about it. I would go over to the corner after the tow truck was gone and look for whatever they'd missed or just not taken the time to retrieve. My main reason for the search was for change that might have fallen out. This meant an extra candy bar to split with my brother. Mom always made me share, or a new Hot Wheel. There was always something left behind. A shoe, a hairbrush, a baby bottle, etc. I found a box of bullets once. And another time I found a Hustler magazine that opened up a whole new world to me. So a car wreck at the corner was always a cause for excitement. On this particular night, the truck was going way too fast. We could hear it long before it was anywhere near the house. I watched down the road towards the bottom and could see that the flashes of light from the headlights as they bounced up and down in the distance. My mom turned to me at this point and said, "Who is that?" We knew most of the cars or trucks by the sound of their engines, but someone driving this fast was a rarity, especially in the rain. Plaza Drive was loose gravel over compacted clay and was slicker than snot whenever it got wet. After it was soaked through, it turned into a paste that sucked at your tires and left ruts. But the road had been built up over the years, so the water would run off it before it had a chance to soak in. This resulted in a rounded road more than a flat road, which was fine when it was dry, but more difficult to navigate when wet. "I don't know who it is sure is loud," I replied, with my nose pressed up against the window. Then the lights got brighter, and the truck came into view. It was a 68 or Chevy short bed pickup that was jacked up with the big mudder tires on it. It was a very bright red color, with a blue driver's side door and a white tailgate. "It's Billy," I told Mom. She muttered something under her breath about him killing someone one of these days. She was beating eggs into the cornbread mix vigorously, but kept on muttering, "He knows there's kids here." I told her that he was going way too fast. By now, I had my nose and both hands pressed to the window. Billy was in front of our house, and there weren't any signs of him slowing. As he passed the house, I watched for brake lights, and sure enough, about 100 feet from the 90-degree turn, much too late to even slow down much, the tail lights lit up. As I watched, the lights lifted a little in the air as the front brakes brought the nose down, and then those brake lights went about 10 feet into the air and disappeared. Then I saw one of the headlights and then the brake lights again, rolling over each other in the rain. It finally came to a stop on one of the sides, but I couldn't tell which side. As I was watching and was taking all of this in, my mother half shouted, "Good Lord, what was that?" She heard the booms and the crunches and came over running to me, wiping her hands with a dish rag. She came up behind me and looked out the window, and as we both watched, the lower of the two taillights flickered and went out. Then I heard Mom trotting over to use the phone. She picked it up and listened for a moment before dialing. We shared a party line with two other families. One of the families had a teenager about 6 years older than me, and whose ear was practically glued to the phone. It was seldom that my mom or dad was able to use the phone without having to wait for it to finish talking and hang up. Mom was lucky this time and had an open line. Mom called the police and was telling them what happened and where to go. I was watching the truck. I couldn't really see anything but that one taillight and the headlight shining onto the weeds in front of it. I was watching to see if someone was going to crawl out, but never saw anyone. As I was watching the truck, my mother went to the closet to get a raincoat and umbrella. She was shrugging into the raincoat and giving me instructions at the same time. I was not to leave the house, and I was to keep my brother from touching any of the hot items on the stove if he woke up. Mom started to leave and then said, "Flashlight. I need a flashlight," and went to the utility room at the back of the house to get a flashlight. I just turned back to the truck when the front door banged open, and a woman half stumbled and half fell into the house. She was skinny with big boobs. That was all I noticed at first, being the curious young man that I was. To tell the truth, I didn't really know anything about boobs at the time, except that everyone at school always talked about them, so I figured they must be important. Then I saw the blood. Her whole head was covered in blood. Her hair that I initially thought was brown was actually blonde but bloody. It was a short, choppy type of cut, and I could see that one of her hoop earrings had been torn out of an ear and it was bleeding. Her nose was fat and at an angle. Her lips were bleeding, and she had blood in her teeth. Her forehead had several small cuts and gashes that were all oozing. She had a cut under an eye that my dad would have called a rabbit. Her neck was bleeding too. She was wearing black pants and a light blue bun shirt that had a frilly lace collar. A waitress uniform, I realized when I saw the name tag. It had one corner broken off and was hanging at an angle with blood staining her shirt behind it. One leg of the black pants was ripped from the mid-thigh down to below her knees, and I could see bits of a bloody leg. She had blue kicks that were the similar color as her shirt, but the whole back of one was cut, and there was blood there too. As I was drinking all of this in, my mom came running up the hall wanting to know what happened. She saw the woman and said, "Oh my lord, look at you!" She had the woman sat at the table and went into her doctor mode. She got a bowl of water and set it on the table with a roll of paper towels and began mopping the blood off the woman's face. She was asking one question after the other, but never stopped long enough to let the woman talk. As she got up to go get a glass of water for the woman, my father walked in from work. He started to ask about the blood all over the door and saw the woman. Mom looked at him and told him that the police were coming. As Dad was talking to Mom, someone started beating on the door. It was Mr. Laird, who lived on the other side of the road from us, up from the corner. He said that he saw the accident, and by the time he got to the truck, it was empty. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do. The woman started crying and began telling us how Billy had beat her. She said that he'd used a small end of a fishing rod and had beat her until she bled. I hissed at this because I could relate. Just the summer before, I was riding my bicycle in front of our house, and some kids drove by and yelled something at me. My response was to grab a rock and throw it at them. I was pretty handy with a rock, but the car was going too fast and I never had a chance. Worse though, my father saw what I had done and came striding out to me. He asked me what I had done, and I told him that I hadn't done anything. Then he said he saw me throw the rock. He thought I lied to him, but I meant that I hadn't done anything to make the kids yell at me. I had a white fiberglass whip antenna with a big orange flag mounted on the back of my bike. It was kept in the holder with a screw that was long gone, but if I didn't jump a ramp or ride over anything too bumpy, it stayed in the holder. Before I could explain, Dad grabbed it and grabbed me by the upper arm and gave me 2 quick swats. I was wearing shorts and it stung like nothing I've ever experienced before. Then he made me walk my bicycle back into the barn and put it away. I didn't need to be having fun on a bicycle if I was going to lie to him, so I knew all about how it felt to get a stripe or two. She told Dad that her name was Margaret, which I thought was strange because her name tag clearly said Molly on it, but I knew better than to chime in when adults were talking, so I did not say anything. But then, she said that she and Billy had been seeing each other on and off for the past 6 months or so. He picked her up after work that afternoon, and they got back to his place to get high. He wanted to get some more, but she wanted to go home and change first, and he got mad and went crazy and started slapping her around. She told us that. She got mad and slapped him back, and that was when he punched her in the face. She said that it knocked her across the bed and out into the hall, and she started to run out the door, but he was behind her and pushed her, and she fell into his coffee table. She told us that he came into the living room with the short end of the fishing rod and just started hitting her. I could see my dad getting angry because his jaw was tightened up. I looked at Mr. Laird, and he was practically shaking. His lips pressed together so hard that they turned white. He lost his wife 2 summers earlier in a boating accident, and was left with a 14-year-old daughter and twin 8-year-old girls. He was ready to murder. Margaret went on to say that she kicked him in the balls and tried to run out the door. But before she could get outside, he tackled her, and they just fell into the kitchen. He landed on the floor, and she ended up on top of him. She told us that she tried to get up and grab the oven handle for support, but it just popped open and she fell back on him again. But that's when she saw the iron skillet inside the oven. She said that she grabbed it and hit him in the head, and when he tried to fight back, she hit him again. She said that he bucked his hips and hit her in the ribs, and then she just started hitting him over and over and over again. He's probably dead. I hope he's dead. You could practically see the pity rolling off my mother's face. They talked for a few more minutes, and my mother continued to clean the blood away. My father and Mr. Laird decided to go check on Billy to make sure he was still alive and not laying on the floor, and what Mr. Laird called a broke head. As soon as they walked out the door, Margaret changed. At first, she wanted to get her jacket out of the truck, but my mom wouldn't let her leave. She told Margaret that it would be fine and that the police would be there any moment. Then Margaret said her purse was in the truck and that she needed to get her purse. My mother started to tell her that it was okay too, but Margaret insisted that her medicine was in a purse and that she needed to take her medicine. My mom is as good as they get. She can be a little backward sometimes, but she's not an idiot. Suspicious now, she asked Margaret what medicine she needed. Margaret stalled. It was obvious that she was searching for a suitable answer. Suddenly, she looked up and actually had a half smile as she held up a single finger and said, "My inhaler. I need my inhaler." Then almost comically, she lost a smile and slumped in the chair and began breathing in a raspy manner. My mother, bless her heart, is one of those old sows who looks for the best in any kind of situation. The thought of lying to someone, especially in a time of crisis, was not beyond her, and for some odd reason, she never could believe that anyone would lie to her. Yes, I took advantage of this on more than one occasion. I was a kid, not a saint. My mom got this worried look on her face. She was obviously torn between leaving me and my brother alone with a strange woman and letting the woman suffer. She looked between Margaret and me and my brother asleep on the sofa and the window and back to Margaret. By this time, Margaret was blowing like a racehorse between gasps of breaths. She told my mother not to worry and that she'd be back in a minute. My mother and I watched as she got up and limped to the door, leaving tracks of blood from her cut foot. We watched out the window as she stumbled across our yard to the road and towards the truck. At that moment, the phone rang, and I watched as Mom talked to the caller. From the tone of her voice, I knew it was my dad. She started to tell him about Margaret going back to the truck, but stopped when he started shouting. I could hear his voice through the tiny speaker all the way across the room. When I looked back to the truck, I couldn't see Margaret, but I did see the police arrive, and I said so to Mom. She was finishing the call with a lots of okays and nods of the head. When she hung up the phone, she went over and locked the door and told me to come away from the window. My mom and Mr. Laird drove back into sight, but instead of pulling into our yard, they went to where the police were looking over the truck. It was pretty dark by now, and all I could see were the lights from my dad's car, lights from the police car, and one tail light on Billy's truck. I could also see 2 flashlights shining all over the truck and then inside the truck and then into the surrounding trees and bushes. I watched my father run up to the police, and I knew he was shouting because both of the flashlights whipped up and over to him. He was pointing back to his car. Then I watched the flashlight start bobbing up and down and the back and forth as the policemen were running towards my dad's car. Then I saw the inside light come on and the flashlight beam shining on 2 men in the back seat. One of the policemen went back to the police car and sat inside for a minute, and then went back to my dad's car. Nothing else happened for a long time. Then I heard the sirens. I watched as a glow of light appeared on top of the hill where FM 2797 went to town. First, I saw only the bright white light glow of the headlights of a car coming from the town, and I could hear the sirens getting louder and louder, but then I saw the red flashes. It was another police car rushing to the scene of the accident. By this time, I was sharing the window with my mother, who was telling me to stay away from the window 5 minutes earlier. As the car got to the bottom of the hill and the entrance of Plaza Drive, I saw that it was a big van. It was an ambulance. This was the first time I'd see one that wasn't on television. Had lights all over the top of it. It stopped behind my dad's car, and the two men jumped out the back with a stretcher that had a pole with a bag on it. They rolled it to my dad's car, and because of all the lights, I could see everything now. They were pulling a man out the back seat and laying him on the stretcher. My first thought was that Mr. Laird had been hurt, but then I saw him walk around from the other side of the car. I had no idea who was on that stretcher. After just a minute or two, the men rolled the stretcher back to the ambulance and loaded it inside. I remember thinking how neat it was that they didn't have to lift it up. They just pushed it into the back and the legs folded up. They crawled into it behind it and shut the doors. The ambulance turned towards and started the siren again and headed back into town. After a few more minutes, a tow truck appeared, and I got to watch them pull Billy's truck onto its wheels. The man moved the tow truck around to the back of Billy's truck and raised the bed of the truck into the air, and then hooked up some more chains and drove away. Billy's truck looked weird. It had a big hump in the middle or something like that. This left my dad and Mr. Laird talking with the police. They were all standing in front of the police car in the rain, the police taking notes on a little pad he had pulled from his shirt pocket. Then the police both shook my dad's hand, then Mr. Laird's, and everybody got back inside their cars. My father dropped Mr. Laird at his house and then came back home. My mother was full of questions and tried asking them the moment my dad stepped into the door, but he was covered in blood. She dropped her spatula and asked what had happened. Before my dad could even open his mouth, she asked if he was okay. He held up his hands and said it wasn't his blood, and then glanced over to where I was staring with my mouth hanging open and my eyes as big as a dinner plate. He told my mother to let him take a shower and that he'd tell her everything. She started to protest, but relented after a moment as my dad went to the bedroom to get clean clothes. My mother finished cooking and had the table set by the time he was out of the shower. We were all sitting there waiting when he came and sat with us. He said that Billy's been shot bad 3 times. Once in the leg, once in the shoulder, and once in the stomach. He went on to say that the paramedics said it wasn't life-threatening, but he had lost a lot of blood and would be in the hospital for a few days. My dad said the police called his family and that his brother was going to watch his house and take care of his dogs. Then he started telling Mom about what happened. He and Mr. Laird went to Billy's house, and when they got there, it was a mess. He said that from the way it looked, Margaret had been telling the truth. They called his name and heard him moan in the back bedroom. When they went to the bedroom, they knew something was wrong. Billy was sitting in a pool of blood. His right hand was tied to the bed frame with zip ties. His head had a knot the size of a softball just above his forehead. Billy told them that he'd met Molly. That was what he called her, a few weeks before at a dance club in Liberty. They met at a dance hall. They'd been out a few times, and he promised to take her someplace nice the next time he was home. Billy did oil field work and made a very good salary, but he drank and partied most of it away each week. She was evidently waiting for him when he got home this afternoon. Billy told my father that he thought it was strange that she was at his house without a car, but invited her inside and had just taken a shower and was getting dressed when she attacked him. He'd been bent over to get his boots from under the bed, and she hit him with a cast iron frying pan. He said when he woke up, he'd been dragged to the living room and she was trying to tie his feet together with a belt. He said that he kicked her away and got to his feet, but was too dizzy and she was going crazy. She kept asking him where his money was. She knew he didn't trust banks, and he told her that he always cashed his checks on the way home each Friday. He said he tried to get on his feet, and she saw that he was still dizzy and came at him again with a frying pan, and he was able to fend her off and grab her legs and pull her to the floor when she kicked him in the head. He said that they wrestled around in the living room for a minute, and she finally let loose and ran to his bedroom and locked the door. He kept his gun on his nightstand, and she grabbed that and shot him in the stomach through the closed door. He said he fell, and when she heard him fall, she unlocked the door and came out and held the gun to his head and demanded his money. Billy said that he grabbed at the gun, and she shot him in the shoulder, and then while they were both fighting for the gun, she shot him in the leg. He got the gun away from her, but before he could do anything, she grabbed the frying pan and hit him in the head again. When he woke again, she was in the bathroom going through the pockets of his dirty jeans. She left the pistol on the bed, and he grabbed it and was going to shoot her, but missed because he was using his left hand, and he was still dizzy. He told her that he was going to kill her and started getting out of the zip ties. Molly ran out of the bathroom, and he kicked at her, but he heard her run down the stairs and then heard his truck start. He said he tried to get up, but he got dizzy and fell again, and the next sounds he heard was my father calling his name. Margaret or Molly disappeared that night. The police questioned my father the next day to weigh his story, and Mr. Laird's to see if they jived with Billy's version of the story. Mr. Laird stopped by a few days later and told my father that one of his friends who was on the police force told him that they'd gone to her place of employment, but nobody knew anything. She had missed her shifts for the last 2 days, and nobody knew anything else about her. They found a purse in the truck with almost $3,000 in it, and another gun and some other random items, but they had no clues about who she was or where she was from. Billy lost his spleen and was off work for about 3 months. His truck was a loss too. He kept the bullets they pulled out of him in a big orange pill bottle. He even showed them to me once. Sorry if this is too long or anticlimactic. This is a vivid memory of me on several levels. I actually got to see a wreck as it happened that night. I got to see an ambulance in action for the first time. We had a dangerous woman barge into her house and drip blood all over the place. I knew someone who got shot. I got to see the scars and bullets. When you're 10 years old, these things stick with you. Now, who wants to hear about the kid who lived 4 houses down from me? He was the one who shot his neighbor. I even have a newspaper article about that incident. Let me know. Evil is alive and well. This all happened back in mid-June. If the following narrative is in any way confusing or hard to follow, please let me know, and I'll do my best to elaborate. I live in a small town in the southern Appalachians. Crime is low and overall it's a very safe place. Recently I made the acquaintance of a guy I'll call Matthew, whose family is from around here. He moved back to town after a bad car accident and some issues with his last girlfriend. There was nothing particularly off-putting about him. He had a tendency to ramble, but then again, so do I. Overall, he was pretty friendly, personable, and enjoyed talking about a lot of different subjects. I liked his company, and he was without transportation, so I ended up being his ride to and from the local bar. One time, I took him back to the trailer where he'd recently found a room for rent. Before we got there, Matthew gave me a kind of weird warning about his landlord. It didn't make too much sense ahead of time. Something about said landlord being really intense and aggressive. I wasn't planning on staying long, a good idea in retrospect, and figured if things got weird, I'd just say a quick goodbye and ease my way out. Looking back on it now, I'm still not sure what was going on in that trailer. It was fairly seedy, and the living room was pretty sparsely decorated. Couch, coffee table, a few chairs, some wall hangs, and a fairly prominent insane clown posy poster. Definitely not my kind of scene, but I didn't want to hurt Matthew's feelings by turning on my heel and walking out immediately. His landlord radiated a kind of terrifying friendliness, as if someone had taught him the concept of being a good host, but hadn't informed him that cocaine was also a hell of a drug. There was another housemate of theirs who kept to himself out on the porch. Said housemate and I exchanged maybe 3 words the entire time I was there. There was also, for lack of a better word, a couple on one of the chairs. They seemed to be under the influence of one of several substances, and the female half of the couple in the process of losing her clothes. I don't mean she was undressing so much as her clothes appeared to be sagging off of her body in slow motion. She split her time between asking incoherent questions and yelling at the radio. Once I finished the obligatory beer the landlord had given me when I arrived, I took my leave using my all-time favorite excuse of having to get dinner ready. Matthew called me later that night to apologize. He was fairly certain that the girl and perhaps her partner were on meth, and went on to say that her partner might have been trying to pimp her out. I suggested he might want to try and find another place to live. He shrugged it off, pointing out that his rent was insanely low, and he needed to get back on his feet, and didn't have anywhere else to go. I dropped the matter, I said my piece, and it was his life and his choice. That being said, I did resolve to never go inside that trailer again. I broke that promise to myself a week later. The night in question. On this particular night, I picked up Matthew at Shaz's creepy trailer on the outskirts of town. The bar I like to frequent is right in the middle of town, maybe 2 or 3 minutes away by car. Within less than an hour, he ended up at a table outside on the patio with 3 people I did not recognize. I figured that at least one of them was a friend of his, and didn't pay them much mind, as I was hanging out with several other people in which I knew. Things got progressively, if slowly, weirder throughout the night, as various people approached me and asked about the people Matthew was sitting with. "Do you know any of those people?" one lady asked. "Yeah, Matthew the guy in the hat," I said. "He's cool." "What are those other people with him?" "They gave me the creeps." I turned and looked. 2 guys, one taller, one shorter. The tall guy had something close to dreads, and the short guy had a kind of facial hair normally associated with college freshmen. There was also a girl with them who wasn't particularly remarkable in any way, other than the fact that she had awful teeth. I didn't see much of her later on, though. Whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, I am not entirely sure. Another friend of mine had a more outspoken opinion on the subject. "Hey, do you know those fuckers at the table?" He growled at me. Said friend is a biker-looking dude who happens to like me. I knew that he once held a would-be burglar at gunpoint, so my affection for him is tinged with no small amount of respect. "Yeah, Matthew," I said, in a great display of originality. "The guy in the hat? Who are those assholes with them?" Scary friend wanted to know. "I don't like the way they look. Matter of fact, I kinda want to hit him over the head with a beer bottle." I commiserated with him over the sad state of prior restraint laws and went back to blissful summertime outdoor drinking. Not too long after that, Matthew called me. I glanced over at his table. He wasn't there. I figured he had pocket dialed me and answered the phone. "Dude, I messed up." His voice was slurred. I'd seen him consume maybe 3 beers. He sounded like someone who downed half a bottle of whiskey. I asked him where he was, and he told me he was just up the street, outside an antique store at the moment. I left the bar and found Matthew sitting outside the store on a bench, vomiting onto the sidewalk. From his fragmented sentences, he was able to tell me that he thought he'd been drugged and that he was hallucinating. Based on what he told me, I thought there was a decent chance he'd been giving a date rape drug. I managed to help a staggering and disoriented Matthew to my car. Before we were able to leave the bar parking lot, he had to open his door and vomit it onto the ground outside. I remember him moaning, "Dude, I threw up blood." He got agitated when I told him I wanted to take him to the emergency room, insisting that he couldn't go there. Perhaps I'm a bad or at least a weak person, but I've never had an experience remotely similar to this, and my friend was begging me to take him home so he could sleep it off. I wasn't thinking clearly myself, so I drove him back to Chez's creepy trailer. He didn't make it inside, at least not at first. I tried to help him indoors, but he laid down on the porch, leaning over the side to half spit, half vomit what was left of his stomach contents onto the gravel driveway. I went inside and got him a towel and a glass of water, forcing him to sit up so he didn't aspirate whatever was coming up his esophagus. When he started losing consciousness, I finally made the intelligent decision to call 911 and let them handle the quickly deteriorating situation. Matthew cursed at me as I made the call, but lost consciousness before I finished talking to the 911 dispatcher. Time passed. Matthew woke up and had to stumble inside, sitting down on the same chair the meth-addicted couple had been cuddling on the week before. He lost consciousness a second time, this time telling me I was a bad friend for calling the rescue squad. 20 minutes and a half an eternity later, the MC showed up with a police officer and a state trooper. I explained the situation as best as I could. By this point, Matthew wasn't awake enough to tell all and sundry, and that he hadn't been drugged, thanks buddy, and that he just had too many beers at the bar. Then his landlord came home. Maybe I'm an overly charitable person, but if I returned to my home to find a housemate surrounded by medical personnel and police officers, my first question would be, is my housemate okay? The landlord opted to turn to the police officers and demanded to know what the hell they were doing there. His manner was belligerent, bordering on overtly hostile. To their credit, the police officers took the landlord aside in a calm and professional fashion. I couldn't hear anything that any of them said, but I listened to the landlord's tone go very quickly, from unfriendly to smarmy. It was like listening to a class bully convince a gullible teacher that he volunteered at a soup kitchen on weekends. The EMTs, meanwhile, had decided that Matthew's blood pressure, heart rate, and so forth were pretty normal. Without a trip to the ER and a drug test, there wouldn't be any way to determine that. If anything, he had ingested what would have caused the hallucinations and vomiting. Matthew, for his part, was adamantly against taking a ride in an ambulance. The EMTs told the police officers they had another call to get to, and that Matthew should be fine in the morning. Once the EMTs had left, I turned to the 2 policemen. "Is it okay if I go?" The state trooper is actually someone that I know as a friend, outside of his duties as a police officer. He pulled me aside. "Not only are you free to go, if I were you, I'd leave now," he said, quietly, while nodding at the landlord's door. It was only then that I noticed that the door was padlocked from the outside. I took his advice. I left to this day. I have no idea what was going on in that trailer, or that padlocked room, and to be honest, I don't really want to know. The Weird Neighbor's Kid. My story starts when I was 10 and my parents built a house in the next village. We always lived on the countryside, and my mom wanted her own house, so when a farmer gave up a field in the next village, My parents bought some ground to build their own home. So did a lot of other people. A few months passed, and when the working on our house finally began, some other people already had their houses. Whenever I visited the construction site, there was this young boy, probably my age, sitting on his bike staring over. He wouldn't come over and talk, just watching from the distance, for like half an hour, and then he would leave, to come back again later. We moved in and I discovered that he lived in the house in the next street, parallel to ours, but I could see right over, as there was just one other house between. He was outside all day, riding his bike. I didn't think much of him. He usually played with the other boy from my street, Dennis. He would wait for hours outside of Dennis's house until he had time to play. When I asked my mom about it, she told me the name of the boy, Jonas, and that he had some mental issues, so I should be nice. That was the first time he appeared creepy to me. Every time I came home from school, he was already waiting for Dennis. I had to walk past him and he would stare at me until I entered our house. It continued to be like that for some years until one day, where Dennis's father yelled at Jonas to get lost, that Dennis wouldn't come out to play, that Dennis doesn't want to play with him, and he should stop waiting in front of the house. When the door went shut, Jonas started screaming for Dennis for 30 minutes until he gave up, now that he started roaming the entire village. One day, when I was playing with our best friend and younger sisters in some woods near the village, he drove past us. I tried to ignore him, but Mimi, my best friend's sister, invited him to play with us. We were building a treehouse. He came over, but wasn't helpful and just talked about tanks and army jets. When we went to my best friend's place for dinner, we told him he couldn't come, but he followed us and waited for me and my sister to go back home. I'm glad she was there that day. Some more years passed, and we just randomly saw him in the streets. When I was 16 years old, I started a job where I delivered newspapers every weekend. I had to walk the same route every Saturday, and after some weeks, I would casually walk into him during my tours. Then twice, then 3 times. He was following me, and always passing my route on the same places. It made me so uncomfortable that I asked my best friend to walk the routes with me, until I quit the job. Another year passed. I turned 18 years old, without having heard from Jonas. My mom told me he was in a home for mentally challenged teens, where a friend of hers worked. That's why we wouldn't see him around, until one day in June. I walked to the next village because there was a store. I had no car at the time. I needed some stuff and was carrying a rather heavy bag. It's not that far from the store to my house, and I always use a shortcut, some stairs up to the village next to a pasture that was close to the wood where we had our treehouse. You had to cross a river, and from the stairs, you could see over the entire valley. It was a stunning view, and I loved just sitting there and enjoying nature. So, when I came closer to the river, I noticed someone approaching me and soon realized it was Jonas. He was coming closer to my direction. I greeted him and went my way. When I crossed the river, I felt this odd tingle on my neck and turned around. He was standing there, where I greeted him, staring at me. I turned around and entered the short way through the woods to the stairs. As I looked through the trees, he was still standing at the exact same spot. I felt the need to hurry. I reached the stairs, looking back as he was still standing there. But suddenly, he started running in my direction. I froze for a moment, as I couldn't believe that was happening right now. When we entered the shortcut, I gained control over my legs and ran up the stairs. 2 women with a dog were walking by. I just said, "Hey," and continued running home without looking back. 1 hour later, someone knocked on our door and my mom opened. She called my name and asked me to come at the door. Some people were here to see me. I recognized the 2 women with a dog. One was apparently the mom of a classmate from grade school, and that's why she knew where I lived. They had brought a man who told me that he is a police officer, also living in the same village, and the 2 women saw Jonas running after me, that I looked scared and they were worried. If I knew who he was and if he did something, if police should take action. I told him that Jonas just scared me by suddenly running after me. Nothing happened. He gave me his phone number and address. If something comes up, I should tell him right away. 2 weeks later, I received a message via ICQ from an unknown user. He started insulting me, asking for nudes, threatening me, then telling me that he is sad and lonely, and just too scared to talk to me in person. I printed the chat logs and went to the officer's house. He took them and said he would look at what he can do. It turned out that it was in fact Jonas who did it. He had to go to a psychiatric home. And I haven't heard from him or seen him since then. I now live in another city and hope that I won't see him again. Want some vodka? I lived in North Carolina for the past 10 years of my life, mainly in one of the big cities. I used to live in a not-so-great area of the city. It was so bad that I got sexually assaulted. and one of my neighbors got murdered, so I'm used to not so friendly people and not the best of places. Around 7 years ago, my parents got better jobs in a different city, and I went to school in that same area, so we moved and it's a lot nicer. I feel safe enough to chill outside late at night, and everyone is pretty friendly. Still, we're cautious. I'm training karate, my dad owns 2 shotguns, and we have a 130-pound American Akita named Jax. Honestly, he's scary looking, but he's a big baby. There's a neighborhood cat he's best friends with, and he cries when people don't pet him, but he can be scary. The first time he barked, I nearly shit my pants. Because he's so big, people tend to stop and ask about him. When I'm walking him, they'll come up and ask the typical questions about what breed he is, how much he weighs, and all that stuff. He normally sits there and loves the attention. Everyone in my neighborhood is friendly, for the most part, and they know me as the girl with a giant dog. One evening in mid-June, I'm walking Jax and listening to my music when we cross the road and this guy is parking in his driveway. He's older, probably in his mid-40s, and he waves at us. I wave back and try to continue on my way, but he approaches me. I groan internally and yank out my headphones as he walks over, all smiles. "What kind of dog you got there?" he asks as I notice he's covered in what looks like engine grease or oil. "An American Akita," I responded, trying to keep it short and simple so I can go back home and eat dinner, but this man keeps talking. "Jesus, he's a big one. How old is he asks, and I tell him he's 6 years old and he was born on Christmas. The man nods and smiles, and I notice that something is up. Jax, for once, is not sitting down and wagging his tail, begging for attention. Instead, he's pulling on his leash and trying to drag me away. I assume he just wants to finish his walk, so I tell the man bye and turn and walk away when he yells after me, "Wait, can I buy your dog?" he asks. "I'll give you $600. I turn around and look at him with a shocked look on my face. Until then, no one has ever asked to buy my dog from me. "Sorry," I stammer out. "He's not for sale," I tell him, and Jax is still tugging on his leash, and I'm starting to get creeped out. Who just asked to buy someone's pet from them on the street? The man frowns and crosses his arms. "Ah, well. Do you want some vodka?" he asks. "Sir, I'm 17, I tell him, starting to back away. He laughs and shakes his head. "Come on, I won't tell. Loosen up a bit, girl," he says, and he grabs my arm and starts pulling on me. Just then, Jax comes ripping around and starts barking like mad. The dude lets go and starts cursing at me, and Jax is still losing it. I've got tears in my eyes, and I start running up the street back to my house, dragging Jax with me, who's still barking. At this point, his super deep and animalistic bark has attracted the attention of all the other dogs in the neighborhood, and as I'm running about 2 blocks to my house, there is about a dozen dogs barking in their yards and houses. I got home, locked the door, told my mother what happened, while Jax stood at the window for a good 30 minutes, just staring at the street. It's been a year since that happened, and I don't walk Jax that way anymore, but I did notice that the house has been foreclosed on to the man who tried to buy my dog and then offered me vodka and tried to drag me into your house. Let's not meet again. I wonder what would have happened if I followed my dad. This particular incident happened almost a decade ago, when I was maybe 10 years old. I think I should stress before this that my parents aren't really pranksters. Even in regular social situations where everyone's joking around and messing with each other, they usually get straight to the point. I have no reason at all to believe they were lying. It was the camping trip my dad had been looking forward to every day since the snow melted into springtime. He requested a week off work in late June so that we could all go up to his favorite chunk of forest, the state park about an hour's drive away from where we lived, and do this thing as a family. We get set up on the campground, us 2 kids in one tent, my older brother and I, and my parents in another tent. The first day goes great. There's a lot of splashing around in the river, hiking. I've been kind of like a chubby kid my whole life, so that part was less great. During fun family stuff, you know? My brother and I rarely get along. This was one of those rare moments where we actually enjoyed each other's company. Anyways, the sun starts to set, casting everyone in gold, and then night finds the 4 of us sitting around the campfire, making s'mores. I remember getting really spooked by all the noises in the distance, and my parents were constantly telling me to calm down. They reminded me that there were other campers here. It's a state park after all, and this was the biggest time of the year for campers. Also, there were no doubt lots of small furry animals like raccoons or squirrels or whatever running about out there in the darkness. This eases my nerves for a moment or so. I could have sworn I heard a particular sound nearby, though. I knew that sound from all the games of hide and seek I played so often as a kid. It was a sound of someone trying to hold their breath, but they were too excited to fall completely silent. But only for a moment, and then it was gone. The real event happened the next night. All four of us, were in our tents. My brother fast asleep in the sleeping bag right next to me. I have a lot of body warmth on account of my chubbiness, so I unzipped my bag and was just laying, staring into the darkness. I was trying to fall asleep to the soft lullaby of Mother Nature and whatnot, but it wasn't really coming to me. I reach over and, as delicately as possible, slip my brother's old flip phone out of his pillowcase, where I knew he liked to keep it safe. I don't remember the time exactly, but it was very early in the morning. Back when I was at that age, I rarely stayed up after 10 p.m. Nearby, I heard a zipping sound. It was probably coming from my parents' tent, I figured. Thinking that somehow my dad knew I was awake, I quickly slipped the phone back into the pillowcase and fell back into sleeping position. Muffled footsteps, the crunching of gravel, the snapping of twigs, walked closer towards our tent, then coming to a stop right outside the tent flap. "Dad?" I asked after a moment, whispering so as to not wake up my brother. "Hey, I'm going to the bathrooms. Do you need to go?" the person outside the tent asked, remembering that the bathrooms, that big building in the middle of the campgrounds that held the showers and the toilet seats, were in the direction my dad was walking. I realized I did have to pee. "Yeah, give me a second," I replied quietly. So I quietly got up, stepped gingerly over my older brother, stepped on the flip-flops, and exited the tent. Sure enough, some ways down the gravel pathway that leads to the bright light of the bathrooms was the big, bulky silhouette of my father. He was too far, and the light too glaring to see him too clearly. I walked after him, shivering slightly in the wind. I got to the bathrooms. My dad was probably already in one of the stalls. Since I couldn't find him anywhere in there, I went into a stall and did my business. As he exited his stall without flushing, he left the building again without washing his hands. I finished up and followed after him. "Dad, wait!" I called, whispered, picking up speed to catch up. The bulky silhouette waved a hand towards me and headed into a different angle of the trees that we had come. This confused me, and I stopped. "Hey, come on. This is a shortcut," my dad said. I realized I never actually seen his face the entire night, so I got a little nervous. "That's a stupid shortcut. I'm going this way," I said, and headed towards the actual direction of the campsite. The man got impatient. "Get over here right now. We're going this way, you little shit." My dad has never sworn to me before, so that's when the alarm bells really started ringing. I turned and ran as fast as I could, finding our camping spot and practically diving into my parents' tent. To my surprise, I found my parents playing cards under the light of a tiny electronic lamp. I asked my dad if he'd gone to the bathroom at all that night, to which he replied no. My parents had woken up a few minutes beforehand by what they thought was a raccoon snooping around where a trash bag was outside the tents. That's when they decided that they couldn't sleep and they should play cards. I told them what happened, and my parents got out of the tent and searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. To this day, they can't decide if there was actually a man trying to lure me into the dark forest, or if I just had like a bad dream or something like that. I was a pretty imaginative kid back then, and knowing how my brain is better now, even I don't trust myself entirely to know what's the truth or what's just my overactive imagination. One time while I was driving, I ran a red light, swearing up and down that I've been told for the last 18 years that green equals stop and red equals go. I remember going to the store wearing white socks with flip-flops because my brother told me as I was walking out the door that I looked like an idiot wearing white socks with flip-flops. But as I was standing in the checkout line, I realized I didn't have socks anymore. Another time I triple-checked to make sure my car was locked in a parking lot, and coming back to find my car unlocked and my keys disappeared from my pocket and sitting in the driver's seat. Things like that happens sometimes. Creepy bike guy. I'm not very good at writing, so I apologize. This happened in June of 2015 when I was 15 years old. Now, let me give you some background information. I live in a pretty shady town, which has plenty of sexual predators and trashy people in general. I'll call it PvP. PvP is a weird town. You get in there and it's like you're on a new planet. You feel very off, like something is wrong. It's not something you feel immediately, but after like half a year of living there, you begin to realize it. So one day, my dad and I were walking down the street to go catch the bus. This random man, who looked like he was in his 50s, was riding a bicycle down the streets. We didn't pay much attention to him, as we were caught up in our own conversation about what we had to buy at Walmart. We only paid him any mind when he stopped and got off his bicycle staring at me. I felt instantly uncomfortable, but tried to smile and be polite. I figured out just being irrationally scared. He came up to us and said, "Sir, I would like to say that your daughter is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my whole entire life. I would like to marry her." I instantly froze and my smile faltered. I couldn't believe what he had just said. Then my dad shifted so that he could be in front of me and said, "She's 15. The man gave a creepy smile, which showed off his nasty yellow teeth. "Well then, come and find me when you're 18, sweetheart." After that, he rode off. I was a bit scared, but figured I wouldn't see him again. After all, I don't leave the house very often. We got onto the bus, and I forgot about the whole thing after about 10 minutes. My dad and I did our shopping, came home, and put all of our stuff away. When we were done, we decided to sit on the porch outside because we were hot and the house did not have air conditioning. We were only out there for about 5 minutes, and the same man from earlier came riding by on his bicycle. He glanced over at me, but kept riding. My dad went inside to go get a cup of coffee, and this guy came riding by again. He did it a couple more times, each time looking at me, until I finally decided to tell my dad and go inside. Even when I was sitting on my couch inside, peeking out the window, I saw him go by 2 more times. I didn't leave the house for a straight week after that. I heard so many stories about girls being assaulted and raped and kidnapped, even murdered. That was one of my biggest fears and still is. After that week, I decided that I needed some air. I went for a walk down to the Family Dollar, which is about a 15-minute walk. On the way there, I wasn't confronted by anybody. Just an occasional hello, how are you, from some people sitting on their porches, and that was about it. On the way back, I felt calmer. I figured the creepy man had forgotten about me. I was listening to music and zoning out, barely aware of my surroundings when the same guy from earlier came around the corner on his bike and stopped in front of me. I don't think he had been following me. I think he had just been riding around because when he saw me, he briefly looked shocked. Then he gave me that nasty smile, blocked my way and said, "Hello, sweetheart. Haven't seen you in a week." I tried to smile, but I felt my heart drop. I shrugged and told him that I was just feeling a little sick. I need some time to rest. He was still smiling and got a little closer to me. I was very close to kicking him in his shins and running to the hair salon behind me. "I'm never giving up, you know," he said, before looking me up and down and riding up. I breathed in and ran to my house. For the next couple of weeks, I would only leave the house if my sister had to go somewhere and was driving, or if my dad was walking with me. When he saw I was with someone, he wouldn't say anything, just smile. When he did see me run into stores, he would cycle around them for a couple minutes and just wait for me until someone came out with me. For the next 10 months, when I saw him, I would try and duck somewhere and avoid him, or I'd run into a store. The barbershop owners and a lot of his customers know me, because I was constantly running in there and asking him if I could hide for a couple minutes. They had a habit of watching out for me and having someone walk up to the store with me when they see me go by. I think the only reason the man stopped bothering me was because the last time I saw him, he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises, got in my face and said, "I see you're avoiding me. Why are you avoiding me, sweetheart? All I want is you." His eyes were wild and saliva was practically pouring out of his mouth. He smelled horrible. I screamed so loud that I swear people from China could hear me. I was in front of the barbershop that day, thank God, and the owner and one of his customers came running out, one with scissors. They came after him, and he ended up speeding away on his bike. I still see him walking around, but when he sees me, he avoids me. I think he has a drug problem, and the last time he confronted me, he was on something really bad. But not once during that entire ordeal did I inform the cops. I guess I was just too determined to think that he'd leave me alone on his own time after he got bored. So, creepy bike guy, let's not meet again. The Pale Man in Black. I was about 9 years old when the first visit happened. It was midsummer June, I believe it was. I used to stay at my great aunt's house where my parents had to work at night. It was about 3 in the morning and I had to use a restroom. I remember that night like it was yesterday. The air felt unusual and thick like a dense morning after a heavy rain that settled before dawn. As I walked through the dark forest, there was no light, not even from the windows. I always hated walking through the house at nighttime, but this time, there was something strange. I felt an intense fear, something primal, at the very core telling me that I have something to fear. Finally, I reached the bathroom. When I turned on the light, there was nothing there that I noticed. That was until I looked out the window. And there he was, standing at the back of the yard. He wore a suit that was black and gray. It was a weathered outfit that had been worn many, many times. His skin was pale as a sheet of paper, and he wore a hat. It was almost like a top hat, but more distinct. He stood there and stared at me with his eyes. They were glazed over white, like a blind person, but he knew where to look, and he was staring straight at me. At that moment, I pissed myself and started to run back to my room, leaving that thing in the yard by itself. I wasn't alone as I ran. I recall hearing something following me back to the room, although I never looked back. I could tell it was him. Finally, I reached the room, slammed the door, and ran to my great aunt's bed and fell asleep next to her. At one point, I tried to explain why I was running around, and all she said was, "It's only a nightmare. You should sleep now, sweetie, so that he can sleep too." Little did I know, this was merely the beginning of a story that has haunted me to this day. Have you seen the pale man in black? I know, there are many sightings like my own. Creepy classmates. Okay, so starting off, I signed up for the month June Master's English class. I ended up being the only graduate students in a class of about 20 undergrads. My groupmate and I had everything turned into our teacher last Wednesday for a presentation. I think it was last Tuesday, I overhear my classmate having issues with PowerPoint and says I am a whiz at the PPT. I thought I would assist him, plus I had a schoolyard crush on the guy. I ended up helping him set his presentation for Thursday. Flash forward to this weekend, I had to go to my friend's wedding in Vegas. So I'm riding on the Vegas Strip bus from Excalibur back to Stratosphere to take a nap. I get a call from boy classmate needing help on his paper since it was due Sunday, even though I turned mine in that Wednesday. So I make plans to meet with him the next evening when I am back in town. Paper gets worked on at his place, then he kisses me. I'm digging that. Then later he's telling me some things that set up red flags. Flash forward to last night, we were supposed to hang out. However, I was apprehensive about this. At one point we talk on the phone. Guy tells me he's gonna call back in 10 minutes, which turned into no call for probably an hour. So my friend that lives in another state, doing her master's at the same school, ends up coming over. She'd been teaching all day, and she was heading back to her state today, so I left the guy a voicemail before she showed up, letting him know the deal that my friend and I are meeting up. I also texted him to check his voicemail. I kid you not. About an hour later, he's blowing up my Facebook messages and texting. At one point, my friend and I are waiting for our food to be delivered. I get the whole "I love you" text from classmate. I show her and she's all creepy about it, so kind of freaked out by the guy now. And thank God, he doesn't know where I live. My creepy near-step siblings. I've told this to some family members, but never really to anybody else. When I, 28 years old male, was 9 years old, my mother moved myself and two siblings from Texas to Newark, Delaware. She wanted to move in with her boyfriend and his two kids, Dina and RJ. Dina was about 12, RJ was about 13. It was my mother's intentions to marry the guy. It was the summer of 1995, and the place we moved to was a nice, if decidedly blue-collar suburban neighborhood. The 50s era's houses were small but kept nicely up. There were plenty of kids around, and there was even a close-by Dairy Queen and Pat's Pizza to walk to. All in all, it was a fun summer, except the two siblings had some weird, creepy things going on. They were 12 and 13, and thought it was fun to play stripping games, like we play a Go Fish version of strip poker and get down to their underwear. The daughter would go overnight to sleep at the house of an older man who lived alone. I think he was 60-something man who was either divorced or widowed because he had an early 80s Atari system set up that we play with, so I assumed he had grown-up kids. In retrospect, there was a creepy incident with Deanna where, while swimming in a pool, we were underneath an upturned tube together, and she wrapped her arms around me and made kissy noises at me. I mean, she was 12, I was 9. What the hell does a 12-year-old girl flirts with a 9-year-old? As for the son, for a few weeks I slept with him in his room. We had a bunk bed, with me on the top one and he on the bottom. Things were normal. We watched late-night cartoons and the like. Then one night, RJ asked me to sit with him on his bed. RJ said, "We should practice making out for when we have girlfriends." He didn't actually kiss me, but he did the same kind of kissy noise face that his sister did towards me, and put his mouth close to mine while making smooching noises. RJ was pretending to kiss me. Then RJ wanted to get naked with me underneath the covers. He asked me to take off my underwear and do a striptease. And then he did as well, getting naked. That's as far as it advanced, because I think my mom sensed something was off. She started having us keep the door open at night. I eventually moved out of the room because the relationship between my mom and dad devolved, and he had us move into his side area of the house while we started looking for another place to live. We were there in total from June to October of 1995. Looking back, there was definitely something wrong with the siblings. What 13-year-old boy asked a 9-year-old boy to put on a striptease for him or ask him to pretend makeout? I started to think what RJ is like at 30-something. I was being groomed for sure, and by a 13-year-old, which just makes it sad. I consider myself extremely lucky that no actual molestation happened, and even though my mother hadn't put in so much words, she said something was extremely wrong. Super skilled peeping Tom. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 15, and I still don't know what exactly happened. Even now in my senior year of college, about to move on to graduate school, I am still not sure how scared I should be. I'm an only child and female. I live in a fairly rural area in northeastern US with woods and a factory to the rear and side of my house. We live in a double with my grandmother on the other side of us. We have a small deck built around a pool, as well as a front porch and back deck. My side yard entirely fenced in and butts right up against the wide open field, owned by the factory to the rear. It's a normal old home for the region, basement, attic, first and second floor. It was June, and I just started summer vacation from school. I was up late, sitting on the couch watching TV, totally absorbed in whatever, when my mom comes running down the stairs shouting my name. She turns into the living room where I am and runs to the window directly to the right of where I'm sitting on the couch. Here is where the creepy starts. She tells me from her bedroom window upstairs she had just chanced to see a man standing in the street staring in the window at me. If I just turned my head the slightest bit to the right, I would have locked eyes with him. To make it worse, he saw her catch him and just move closer to the house so that he was hidden by the lower roofing over the porch. She then naturally went into beast mom mode and ran down to me. It was a fairly dark outside, and my mom couldn't really describe him well. She thought he was white or at least light-skinned, with really short or buzzed hair and under 6 foot. She had no idea his age except that he was young-ish. We walked upstairs to where she'd been in my parents' bedroom, as she then reenacted the whole thing. We were suitably freaked, as my dad was working late, and it was just us plus my grandmother on the other side. After about 15 minutes of just talking about what happened and what to do, I walked across the tiny hallway into my bedroom. I grabbed the PJ shirt out of my drawer and almost started to undress right there. I was still talking to my mom, who was on the phone to my dad at this point. Luckily, I moved into the tiny hallway before I actually took my top off, in order to better hear the conversations. It was then that I heard a rustling in and under the tree directly across from my window and just outside our fence line. I shouted to my mom and she ran into the room with me. My mom switched off the lights so we could get a better view of the outside in the darkness. Sure enough, the lowest branch of that trees are swaying. He was nowhere in sight by the time the cops and my dad pulled into the front drive. In short, the creep followed my movements from the front of my house to my bedroom window and didn't flee after being caught by my mother. There's a pretty nice restaurant with a bar around the corner from my house, and my parents seemed to think he was probably a drunk guy wandering around, but I don't know if I buy that for the following reasons. 1. How do you know where my bedroom was? Why was he okay with hiding under for at least 20 minutes after he was spotted? 2. There had never been a ruckus at the bar and restaurant itself, let alone any drunks before or since stumbling out and all the way down to my street. I'm curious as to what y'all think. Am I just overanalyzing a typical Tom, or is this guy someone I know or knew? Either way, I hope I never ever see him again.